Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, descendat super vos, et maniat semper.
What if I told you the Catholic Church just made history with a pope who's rewriting the rules of faith? A man whose name echoes legends, whose past holds secrets, and whose future could shake the world's largest Christian denomination to its core. This is the story of Pope Leo XIV, the first American pontiff, and trust me, you're not ready for what's coming. Smash that like button if you're ready to uncover who this man is and how he's about to change the church forever. And subscribe. Ring that bell, so you don't miss a second of this wild ride. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, I want to see how far this story travels. A new pope has been chosen. But here's the kicker, nobody expected this guy. Cardinal Robert Provost, a 69-year-old from Chicago, steps onto the balcony as Pope Leo XIV. The crowd erupts. Why? Because he's the first American ever to wear the papal tiara. But there's a twist you won't believe, and it starts with the name he chose. Why Leo? And what does it mean for the 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide? Let's dive into the man behind the mitre. Robert Provost wasn't born with a silver crozier in his hand. He came from humble roots in South Chicago, a city of steel and soul, where faith and grit go hand in hand. Born in 1955, he grew up in a working-class family with Italian, French, and Spanish blood running through their veins. His parents weren't theologians, they were everyday Catholics who dragged young Robert to Mass every Sunday at St. Michael's Parish. But even as a kid, he had this spark, something that made people listen when he spoke about God. Neighbors called him, the little preacher, always asking big questions like, why does God let people suffer? Fast forward to his teens, and that spark became a fire. He joined the Augustinian order at 20, a group founded in the 13th century, known for their brains and their heart. But here's where it gets juicy, Robert didn't stay in Chicago. He took a leap that would define his life. In 1985, Provost landed in Peru as a missionary. Not the cushy kind who preaches from a pulpit, but the roll-up-your-sleeves kind who walks miles to bring communion to villages nestled in the Andes. Peru was a land of beauty and struggle, home to 30 million people, 80% Catholic, but grappling with poverty and political chaos. Provost didn't just preach, he lived with the people. He learned Spanish, ate their food, and cried with them when floods or violence hit. He became one of them, even earning Peruvian citizenship. Years later, he'd rise to Bishop of Chiclayo, a city of 500,000, where he built schools and fought for clean water. Locals still talk about him like a saint, saying, he was our brother, not our boss. But why does this matter? Because this wasn't just a job, it shaped a pope who knows what it's like to walk in the shoes of the poor. Now, let's talk about that name, Leo XIV. When a pope picks a name, it's not random. It's a signal, a promise. The name Leo carries weight, worn by 13 popes before him, each leaving a mark on the church. Take Leo XIII, the social pope of the 1800s, who championed workers' rights and wrote Rerum Novarum, a game-changer that said, hey, capitalism, don't trample the little guy. Or Leo the Great, who stared down Attila the Hun in 452 and saved Rome. Provost's choice of Leo XIV screams ambition. Is he channeling Leo XII's heart for the poor? Or Leo the Great's courage in crisis? Comment below, what do you think his name means for the Church? But hold on, there's a clue in his first words as Pope that'll make your jaw drop. 70 minutes after the white smoke, Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The crowd hushed. He gripped a piece of paper, yep, the first pope ever to read his opening speech, breaking centuries of tradition. In Italian and Spanish, he said, "Peace be with you all." Together, we must build bridges, establish dialogue, and open our arms to everybody. Then, in Spanish, he gave a shout-out to my compatriots in Peru. The square exploded in cheers. But here's the cliffhanger, those words weren't just a greeting. They were a blueprint. Build bridges. Open arms. That's not fluffy talk, that's a bold vision for a church at a crossroads. What bridges is he talking about? And who's he inviting in? Stick around, because this gets wild. Leo XIV isn't stepping into a cozy papacy. The world's on fire, wars in Ukraine and the Holy Land, migration crises, and a US political scene that's, well, let's just say spicy. Inside the church, it's no picnic either. Pope Francis, who died April 21, 2025, left big shoes to fill. He pushed for inclusion, climate action, and dialogue with other faiths, but not everyone was on board. Some cardinals want to pump the brakes on Francis reforms, others want to hit the gas. Leo XIV, as head of the Vatican's dicastery for bishops since 2023, was Francis' right-hand man, picking bishops who shared that inclusive vibe. But now, as Pope, he's got to navigate a tightrope. Will he double down on Francis' legacy, or carve his own path? Let's unpack his past to find out. Before he was Pope, Provost was a power player in Rome. As head of the dicastery for bishops, he had a say in who led the Church's 5,000 dioceses worldwide. Provost made waves by backing Francis' move to include 3 women in the bishop selection process. Yeah, you heard that right, women helping pick bishops. Revolutionary? You bet. But here's the thing, he's no radical. In Peru, he opposed teaching gender ideology in schools, saying it creates genders that don't exist. So, he's got one foot in Francis' inclusive camp and one in traditional doctrine. That balance is key to understanding the man. Here's where it gets spicy. Provost, now Leo XIV, spent decades flying under the radar, but those who know him, priests, locals, even cardinals, call him down-to-earth and reserved. The Reverend James Martin, a Vatican insider, says he's kind but strategic. Strategic how? In a 2023 interview, Provost talked about synodality, Francis' big idea of a church that listens to everyone, not just the big shots. He said, a bishop isn't a prince in a kingdom. He's got to walk with the people, suffer with them. That's not just talk. In Chiclayo, he was known for breakfasts with his priests, laughing over coffee despite the chaos around him. But as Pope, can he scale that humility to lead 1.4 billion people? And here's the cliffhanger, there's one decision from his past that could hint at his first big move as Pope. Want to know what it is? Keep watching. Back in 2018, as Bishop of Chiclayo, Peru, Robert Provost did something that raised eyebrows. The local government proposed a law to teach gender ideology in schools. Ideas like gender being a spectrum, detached from biology. Most bishops stayed quiet, but not Provost. He penned an open letter, calm but firm, saying the Church supports human dignity but can't back ideas that contradict God's design. It wasn't a rant, it was a line in the sand. Locals rallied behind him, and the law stalled. Why does this matter? Because it shows Leo's not afraid to wade into cultural battles, even when it's messy. But here's the twist, he didn't just say no. He invited dialogue, hosting town halls with parents and teachers. That's the Leo way, stand firm, but keep the door open. So, what happens when that mindset hits the global stage? The Catholic Church isn't just a spiritual giant, it's a global institution, with 5,000 dioceses from São Paulo to Seoul. Leo XIV inherited a world where faith is tested daily. Wars rage in Ukraine and the Holy Land, displacing millions. Climate change is hitting hard, think floods in Bangladesh, where 20 million Catholics live. And in the West, especially the US, the Church is bleeding members. A 2024 Pew Research study found 28% of American Catholics have left the faith since 2000. Why? Some say it's too rigid, others say it's not rigid enough. Leo's got to face these storms head-on. But there's a bigger question: can a pope who built schools in Peru tackle issues like global poverty or secularism? Let's look at his playbook. Leo's no stranger to big ideas. As head of the Vatican's dicastery for bishops, he helped Pope Francis push synodality, a fancy word for a church that listens. Not just to cardinals in red hats, but to everyday folks. In 2023, he backed the Synod on Synodality, a global consultation where lay people, nuns, even non-Catholics got a say on the church's future. Critics called it a Pandora's box, too much change, too fast. But Leo saw it differently. In a rare interview, he said, "The Holy Spirit speaks through the people, not just the pulpit." That's bold. And it's a clue to his papacy. Is he planning a church where your voice, yeah, you watching right now, matters more than ever? But hold up, there's a catch. Synodality sounds great, but it's a tightrope. Open the floor too wide, and you risk chaos. Some cardinals, especially in Europe, worry Leo might dilute doctrine, like the Church's stance on marriage or life. Others, mostly in Africa and Latin America, want him to go further, push for women's roles, tackle corruption, or address the priest shortage. There's only one priest for every 3,300 Catholics globally, and in places like Brazil, it's closer to 1 for 8,000. Leo knows this. In Peru, he trained lay leaders to keep parishes alive when priests were scarce. Could he roll that out worldwide? Imagine a church where lay people run more than just bake sales. That's the kind of shake-up we're talking about. But there's a cliffhanger: one reform he's eyeing could spark a firestorm. Let's talk about women in the church. No, not ordination. Leo's made it clear priestly vows are for men, citing 2,000 years of tradition. But he's got other ideas. In 2024, as a cardinal, he pushed for women to join the dicastery for Bishops' Advisory Board. 3 women, 2 nuns and a lay professor, helped pick bishops for dioceses in Asia and Africa. It was a quiet move, but seismic. Why? Because bishops hold real power: pastoral, financial, even political. Giving women a seat at that table isn't just symbolic, it's a shift. Now, as Pope, whispers in the Vatican say Leo's eyeing bigger roles for women, like leading Vatican departments or advising on doctrine. Picture this: a woman heading the dicastery for the laity, shaping policy for 1.4 billion faithful. Revolutionary? Maybe. Risky? Definitely. But here's the question: will traditionalists let him pull it off? Now, let's go global. Leo's American roots and Peruvian heart give him a unique lens. The US is a cultural juggernaut, but only 70 million Catholics live there. 5% of the global total. The real heavyweights are Latin America, with 500 million Catholics, and Africa, where the church is growing fastest. In Nigeria alone, Catholic numbers jumped 20% in a decade. Leo's time in Peru taught him how to speak to the global south, places where faith is vibrant but resources are thin. Could he shift the church's center of gravity away from Rome, toward regions like Brazil or Kenya? In Chiclayo, he once redirected parish funds to build a clinic instead of a new church steeple. That's the kind of practical faith he brings. But scaling that to a global level? That's where things get dicey. Here's where it gets wild. Leo's first encyclical, his big papal letter, is rumored to drop soon, and Vatican insiders are buzzing. Encyclicals are like a pope's mission statement, setting the tone for their reign. Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum tackled workers' rights, Francis Laudato Si took on climate change. What's Leo XIV's focus? Sources close to the Vatican. Think priests who overhear cardinals at coffee say it's about communion. Not just the Eucharist, but the idea of a church united despite differences. Sounds nice, right? But dig deeper. Communion could mean tackling division, between liberals and conservatives, rich and poor dioceses, even Catholics and other faiths. Is Leo aiming to heal a fractured church? Or is he setting the stage for something bigger, like dialogue with Islam or Protestantism? Stick around, because this could change everything. But let's not kid ourselves, being Pope isn't all incense and inspiration. Leo's got enemies. Inside the Vatican, some cardinals grumble about his American background. Too Western, they say, or too tied to Francis. Others question his reserved style. Can a guy who loves quiet breakfasts with priests handle the global spotlight? And then there's the world outside. Secular governments, from China to Europe, aren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for Catholic influence. China's 12 million Catholics face tight restrictions, and Leo's push for dialogue might hit a wall. Plus, social media's a beast. Every word he says will be dissected on platforms like X, where hashtags like #Pope Leo XIV are already trending. Despite the noise, Leo's got an ace up his sleeve, his story. An American who became Peruvian, a scholar who walked with the poor, a traditionalist who backs women in power, he's a walking paradox. That makes him unpredictable, and that's his strength. In Peru, he once mediated a dispute between fishermen and a mining company, saving jobs without a single protest. That's the kind of skill he brings to the papacy, listening, balancing, then acting. But here's the cliffhanger, there's one move he's planning that nobody's talking about yet. It's not in the headlines, not on X, but it could redefine the church for generations. Want to know what it is? Keep watching. It's not about dogma or doctrine, it's about where the church plants its flag. Vatican insiders are buzzing about a radical idea. Leo XIV wants to take the papacy on the road. Not just symbolic trips, like John Paul II's 104 pilgrimages, but a semi-permanent papal presence outside Rome. Picture this, the Pope spending 6 months a year in a rotating global hub, say, Nairobi, Manila, or Sao Paulo. Why? To bring the church closer to its heartbeats, Africa's booming faithful, Asia's growing diocese, Latin America's 500 million Catholics. This isn't just logistics, it's a statement. Is Leo saying Rome's not the center of the Catholic world anymore? That's the kind of question that keeps cardinals up at night. This idea didn't come from nowhere. In Peru, as Bishop of Chiclayo, Leo, then Robert Provost, rarely stayed in his cathedral office. He'd hop on a rickety bus to visit remote parishes, saying mass in dusty village squares. Locals still tell stories of him blessing crops during a drought, kneeling in the dirt with farmers. That's not just pastoral, it's strategic. He knows faith thrives when it's close to the people. Now, as Pope, he's got a global stage. The Church's future isn't in Europe, where pews are emptying, but in places like Brazil, where 35 million Catholics pack churches, or the Philippines, where 80% of 110 million people are faithful. Could Leo make the papacy a traveling beacon, showing the world that faith isn't tied to one city? But here's the twist, this plan has a hidden edge. Moving the papacy, even part-time, isn't just about optics. It's about power. Rome's been the Church's nerve center for 2,000 years, with Vatican bureaucrats, Curia officials, wielding massive influence. Some of those officials, let's be real, love their marble offices and aren't thrilled about a pope who might set up shop in, say, a Nairobi parish house. Leo's time as head of the dicastery for bishops showed he's no fan of red tape. In 2024, he streamlined bishop appointments, cutting months off the process. Now, whispers say he's eyeing a leaner Vatican, with more authority for local bishops. Imagine bishops in Kenya or Brazil making big calls, on liturgy, charity, even ecumenical talks, without waiting for a fax from Rome. That's decentralization, and it's a game changer. But there's a cliffhanger, one group could derail this whole plan. Let's talk about the opposition. Not everyone's cheering for Leo's global vision. Some European cardinals, especially from Italy and Germany, see a traveling papacy as a betrayal of tradition. The Pope belongs in Rome, one anonymous cardinal told a Vatican journalist. Others worry about logistics, security, funding, even Wi-Fi for papal tweets. Then there's the Curia, the Vatican's administrative backbone. They're not villains, but they've got centuries of muscle memory running the show from Rome. Leo's push to empower local churches could shrink their clout, and they won't go quietly. Plus, there's the faithful. While Catholics in Africa or Latin America might love a pope in their backyard, some in the West fear it'll make the church feel less universal. Drop a comment: would you want the pope to visit your country, or should he stay in Rome? Let's get real, division's a real risk. The church isn't a monolith. In the US, 70 million Catholics are split between progressives who want women deacons and conservatives who want Latin masses. Africa's 250 million Catholics lean traditional, opposing changes to marriage or sexuality. Europe's 200 million are more liberal but shrinking fast. Leo's global push could thrill the global South but alienate the West. His encyclical nods to this, urging patience in disagreement. But patience only goes so far. In 2024, as a cardinal, he mediated a synod debate when African bishops clashed with Germans over family ministry. He kept the room calm, but as pope, the stakes are higher. Can he unite a church pulling in different directions? Or will his big move crack the foundation? Here's where it gets wild. Leo's not just thinking about today, he's planting seeds for 2050. The church's growth is in the global South, where 70% of Catholics will live by then. By taking the papacy global, he's preparing for a future where Nairobi or Manila might outshine Rome. His Peruvian heart knows the power of presence. In Chiclayo, he once walked 10 miles to a village after a flood, carrying food with locals. That story still circulates, inspiring priests today. As Pope, he's betting that showing up, in person, not just on a screen, will keep the faith alive. But there's a final twist: his health. At 69, Leo's fit but not young. Vatican watchers say he's planning a short, intense papacy, 5 to 7 years. Is he racing the clock to cement his legacy? Let's talk legacy. If Leo pulls off this global shift, he could be remembered like Leo the Great, who saved Rome, or Leo XIII, who reshaped social justice. A church that's less Roman, more universal, could thrive in a world where borders blur and cultures mix. But if he fails, the church risks fracture, East versus West, North versus South. His encyclical ends with a prayer: may we walk as one, under Christ's light. That's his dream. From Chicago to Peru to Rome, Leo's life has been about walking with people, poor, rich, faithful, doubting. Now, he's asking the world to walk with him. Comment below, what do you hope Leo's legacy will be? Alright, we've done it. From a Chicago kid to a Peruvian missionary to the first American pope, Leo XIV's story is one of grit, heart, and audacity. His plan to take the papacy global could unite the church or test its limits, but one thing's clear: he's not playing it safe. Smash that like button if this journey blew your mind, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment: where do you see the church in 10 years? Subscribe and ring that bell, we've got more stories to tell. Thank you for joining me. Let's keep seeking truth together.